Alrighty, hello everybody. My name is William Paul Hamus, and today I'm joined with Paul Johansson and Thornton Cooper. Thornton is a candidate running to represent West Virginia in the United States Senate, and we will be asking him a series of important questions about his campaign and his plans to address issues that West Virginians face. This interview is not an advertisement or an endorsement. It's simply an opportunity for voters to hear directly from the candidates. So, Paul, if you want to do a quick intro.
Yeah, so Thornton, great to have you on. I understand you've run before. You've been around politics long enough, probably bring a fair amount of wisdom and history to what people may not get. So one of the gifts you may bring to voters is some of that perspective. What Will said, we are not journalists, we are citizens interviewing people who are running to represent us, mainly because we don't find the kind of questions that media and journalists ask that may really get to the character of a person or give them the chance to be themselves. So our interviews were meant to ask questions we thought might be important, but give you a chance to go on at some length about why something matters to you, what matters to you, how you're going about it, and not be clipped off by time constraints. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Awesome.
look forward to getting to know you better, and we'll have some questions for you at the end if you still have time.
I'm
But let's
here
go.
as long as my voice will not be at its optimal thing. I just took some effervescent tablets from Kroger's because I have had a cold for about a week.
Awesome.
So this
Gotcha.
is a little bit different from how I usually sound. It's
All
okay.
right.
Yeah, no worries at all. So
Right.
awesome. Thank you, Paul, and thank you again, Thornton Cooper, for
Cooper.
being here.
Cooper.
That's Cooper.
Yep.
Yeah.
We'll start with the first question, which is, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and share your core policies and goals, just like an intro?
All right. So I am was born in 1950 in South Charleston, and I've been a native it's this my hometown, and I've lived in South Charleston my whole life, except that, well, went to public schools, graduated from South Charleston High School in 1968. A very bookish kid. I was, other kids were out playing sports. I was reading the World Book Encyclopedia back when I was in grade school. I was, learned about chemistry and physics. My older brothers were taking those courses, and I would help them with their homework. And, I would get books from the library about nuclear physics and all that when I was in grade school. And so, as far as my family, my mother was a school teacher and my dad was an electrical engineer. And if you watch these old shows like Father Knows Best or, Father Knows Best is one of them. You had the stereotypical household where you had the mother working in the home, the father being the breadwinner, and the kids. That was the way, the ideal that was set up after World War II. Well, my father were both very intelligent people, and my mother was an only child, and my father was one of eight. And he came from a more rural background. He was from Davis, which is a town in Tucker County. If you've ever been to Blackwater Falls State Park, you go out through Davis, and so he graduated from Davis High School when he was 16. And my mother was born in Alexandria. Her parents moved here around the 1920 or a little bit after. They actually lived here a little bit before the 20 census, but then they moved back to Alexandria. Anyway, she grew up in Charleston and went to Charleston High School and graduated in 1936. And then they had different career paths. His dad had been a coal miner. My dad worked in the mines with a pick and shovel uh, at a mine in Davis, and helped work his way through WVU and got his engineering degree in 1929. And my mother went to Meredith College, which is the Baptist Women's College in Raleigh. My great grandfather, one of them, was a prohibitionist Baptist minister who graduated from Wake Forest, and back then they didn't let women in their college. So mother went to its companion. The companion college was Meredith, and she came out and started teaching and taught for 2 years, from 40 to 42. The original uh, faculty was then called Stonewall Jackson High School on the west side of Charleston. Dad was out there with United, worked for United Fruit on a banana boat that went, between the United States. And the difficulty was I didn't know much about my dad because what happened when I was 5 years old, my dad by that time was working for Union Carbide as an electrical engineer, and my mother was a stay-at-home mother. She'd only worked for 2 years as a teacher. And then on the 4-5 was May 5th, 55. My dad's either lying on the floor or in bed. I'm 5 years old. Don't remember my dad before I was five, very little. He had a stroke, all right? Massive stroke. And so my mother, who was quite happy being a homemaker, was cast into the role of having to be the head of the household. She had to learn to drive. She was in her 30s. And then she went back to teaching. And my dad's personality changed, and they used to argue a lot. And I could always go up into my bedroom and read the World Book Encyclopedia. But so one thing I learned from that is you never know when you're going to die because the doctors all said he was going to die. He survived. He was in the hospital for 9 weeks. And you really need to have a good healthcare system because luckily, before he had had a stroke, he had taken out a major medical policy. So anyway, I was very bookish, tested really, really well, and I was just like to do things to do them correctly. I wasn't with some goal of going to a particular college, but I had high SATs and high PSA. I was valedictorian. So I applied to Yale University and three other schools and got on waiting list at Yale, got in. I was on a scholarship, went there. But I was already a political activist for 60 years. I've been a political activist. 1966, I turned against the war in Vietnam, and when I was a senior in high school, I was helping organize against the war in Vietnam for a guy named Gene McCarthy. He and
Hmm.
Bobby Kennedy were the two peace candidates. Bobby Kennedy was shot the day I graduated from high school and died during my graduation party. And we got Humphrey, Hubert Humphrey, who was been the vice president, hadn't entered any of the primaries. But if Bobby hadn't been shot, who knows? The whole history of the country might have been different. But anyway, I went to Yale. I was always people back when I was in junior high school. I was a really strong supporter of civil rights and against the war in Vietnam when I was in high school. And let me describe myself as a nonviolent radical activist when I was at Yale. I spent a lot of time in demonstrations, rallies, leafleting. Uh, if you all ever watch, if have you either of you ever heard of Doonesbury, the comic strip?
Yeah.
Okay, it was based on a Yale comic strip when I was there. The guy who was 2 years ahead of me, Gary Trudeau, it was a Yale comic strip. My freshman year was called Bull Tales, and my second year was Michael J. But anyway, I majored in political science, took a lot of philosophy and economics and political courses. I'd already taken, my mother was a Latin teacher and English teacher. I took, let's see, Latin in the ninth and 10th grade, Russian in the 11th and 12th grade at South Charleston High School, Russian again my first year at Yale. Then I took Spanish. Uh, I man, despite all my partying and uh, political activities. I managed to graduate in 1972, and by that time, I've been going to school, including private kindergarten, straight for 17 years. I wanted to do something different. So I came home back to South Charleston. I got a job working for the Department of Highways, building the I-64 project through my old neighborhood in South Charleston. Did that for about a year, quit that, and then a little bit later, I worked for the Human Rights Commission, West Virginia Human Rights Commission, uh, investigating discrimination cases involving discrimination based on race, sex, age, etc. Applied to law school, got in, and I was there. Oh, one thing I want to tell you when I was at Yale, of all the things I did, one of the things of which I was proud. So I was on the last all-male freshman class at Yale. And one of the things I did was sign a petition to let Yale for us to go co-ed. So the 68 69 term was all male, and then starting in 69, Yale was co-ed. So we had female undergraduates after that. But anyway, excuse me. Sorry, I have a cold, so I'll need to drink some water from time to time.
Gotcha. And I'm just noticing that you're in your what you're offering. You've covered the first three questions. I'll repeat them when we're done, just so you know, in case you want to mop up, and then we'll probably just go on to the fourth question because I think you're giving a lot more context than people usually do.
All right. Well, anyway. So anyway, I worked for the Department of Highways after I got my law degree, and then I worked for the Public Service Commission for 25 years. I'm ready to go.
All right.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Don't be sorry. Don't be sorry, man. We're
So,
patient.
so anyway, when I was Department of Highways, after I got out of law school, and that was from 78 through 81, I did a bunch of different things. I represented the Department of Highways as an employer in workers' compensation, unemployment compensation cases, but I also did other things. Now, you folks, when you get off on the exit, you see those signs that tell you where the hotels are and where the
Yeah.
motels are.
Yeah.
I'm the guy. I did it with there's a guy named Jack Pasquale. I was in the legal division. I helped work out the very first one of those, and it was on I-81 in Berkeley County.
Oh,
So
man.
when you see those, there were like four categories: lodging, restaurants, um, gasoline, and I guess recreational places. But the reason we had to draft new laws was that Lady Bird Johnson, Lyndon Johnson's widow, was very much for beautification of the highways, which I think is great, not to have all these billboards. But the paucity of billboards meant that people said, where can I pull off to get gas? So that they decided to modify the things so you'd have those four categories. And so I helped implement that back around 1980. So the next time you get off an interstate, Thornton Cooper, one of my accomplishments, and of course now it's all over the state. Anyway, I worked for the Department of Highways for 2.5 years, went over the Public Service Commission, and I was a staff attorney. Then I became a deputy director. I helped regulate landfills, garbage companies. For example, in Berkeley County, there's a landfill, all right? And so I was involved in, while I was there, I was in all these administrative cases, but also both in my pro bono cases and when I worked for the Public Service Commission, I've been before the state Supreme Court about 30 times, okay? And I've argued cases in federal court, including the cap on the landfill in Berkeley County as a result of federal litigation. And I also briefed a case that went up to the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. So I have a great deal. I've been licensed to practice law for almost 48 years. But because I was working at the PSC, et cetera, I could get involved in like ballot issues and various other things. For example, you see how smoking's restricted. Well, back in 78, smoking was everywhere. It was in the legislatures. There were smoking areas at schools. So I'm sensitive to secondhand smoke. And I got on the board of the American Lung Association of West Virginia, served on that for 15 years as a board member and officer, worked very hard for non-smokers' rights. So Will, you don't know what life was like. You
You're
see,
right. You're very right.
so that's
Watch,
one thing I'm
watch a
proud of.
1950s movies and you'll get a sense of it. Everyone is smoking in all
Yes,
those movies. It's funny.
The Perry Mason episodes. And I
Hmm.
also was involved in a lot of school consolidation things, but I helped either support or oppose constitutional amendments. So finally, I retired when I was 55 in 2005, and then I could start running for office. So I've run for office a few times. And so I've always been an activist now for 60 years. Not paid to do it, but to be an activist. And with Trump, what he's trying to do to the country, he's trying to undo what I've been fighting for during the last 60 years. And I said, I looked at some of the other people who are running, and I said, well, You need to have somebody at the top of the ticket on the Democratic side who can articulate issues and understands complicated legal issues and does not hurt the people who are down the ticket. So I decided to register, fill out my certificate announcement. I'm primarily self-funded. So you ask questions of another candidate about, would you take this money or that money? My money comes from is I'm basically from my pension and my Social Security. As far as worried about the questions about would I take money from some uh, awful group, that's not going to come up. I'm the treasurer of my group's Cooper for Senate. So you can, my donations are either by check or through Act Blue. So that ain't going to happen. If there's a check from somebody that I don't agree with, I will be very politely send it back, and it will not even there wouldn't be no record of it because you send me a check and you're not acceptable. I'll send a polite letter back saying I respectfully decline the contribution. So anyway,
Got it.
so I wanted to
Well,
cover that. Go ahead
no,
now.
thank you. You're like I said, you're ahead of us, and we'll come back to the questions. What I'd like to do is repeat the first three questions and just acknowledge I think you've covered them, and if you come back to them, you will. We asked you like your core policies and goals, which you've shared, where you grew up, and how you got to know West Virginia, what influenced you to pursue politics. My sense is you've really dived into those. The next question I don't think you've covered, so this one will be a new one. Is there anything about your history which, if revealed, could harm your campaign?
Hey, I'm 76. Now, like most, I'm a baby boomer, okay? But remember, I'm running for a 6-year term. I'm more than 8 years younger than Bernie Sanders. So even if I'm elected, I'll still be younger than Bernie is, Bernie is now. Hey, I'm not perfect. Uh, and so there's nothing I'd be embarrassed about, but certainly I, um, I'm a curious person. I experimented with things, and and so after I graduated from law school, I don't do those things anymore. But I'm not embarrassed. I was a radical activist when I was at college. I'm not embarrassed by that. I'm proud of that. So I don't think you're going to find any skeletons in my closet. I've never made a secret of, what I've done. I'm proud of what I've
Yeah.
done. Not that I would do things as a 76-year-old that the way I did it 55 years ago. But when you have a different stage of your life, I'm in the final quarter of my life. Unless I live to be over 101, I'm in the final quarter of my life. And a lot of things that are really important to people in their 30s and 40s, like getting your name in the paper and all that. No, I just want to be able to have someone to do it when I go to ballot to the vote. I want somebody to run that doesn't embarrass me.
Got
So
it. All right. So, Will, you got next?
Awesome. You already talked about this too. Our next question was, what commitments are you willing to
Oh,
make
no, no,
regarding the
no, you
source?
missed the one before. One before.
Oh, yeah. Oh, oops.
Right.
It's who are the people you don't want voting for you?
that we have a secret ballot in West Virginia. Let me. I was listening to your interview of another candidate. Let me tell you the reality here. I'm putting up money from my savings. Okay, that's my primary source of funding my campaign. But if other people want to donate, they can. But here's a story. Let's be honest. Uh, when I ran 2 years ago as Secretary of State, I got a little bit under 30% of the general election vote. And if you averaged you went down all statewide races in 2024, and the ratio of the Republicans to the Democrats in terms of the votes cast was about 70 to 30. So whether I raised, if I were to be, Democrats were making me their nominee, it wouldn't matter whether I raised 10,000, 100,000, a million. No matter which of the five of us is the nominee, we don't have one chance in 100 of beating Showing More Capita. So this whole thing is one of the things that really frustrates me with politicians is they say, "Oh, you give me some money and I'm going to get elected." Hey, I'm not delusional and I'm not dishonest, but I'm going to be there to be if I, no, well, at least I have another 50 days to articulate my views before the primary. If my party decides to, give me the, nomination, I will have at least till November. I strongly disagree with what's happening with the Trump administration. I think the Senate, they're not doing what they're supposed to under the United States Constitution. I'm the direct descendant of between 10 and 20 people who qualified me to be able to join the Sons of the American Revolution. Here it is, a quarter of 1,000 years. And you look at what they risked. All I risk is losing the primary or the general election. I'm trying to do my job, being a patriotic American, putting my name out, and also explaining what's wrong, what we need to do, where we need to push this country. So you talk about whether I want to turn away votes or not. It's not. This is not something that I worry about. I mean, it's not that
Yeah.
well, I'm not going to make statements like they're like Hillary Clinton and all that. People have the
Right.
reasons for voting for or against people. I'm not. I'm not trying. No, if I were elected, which is a very tall order, win the nomination in general. Doesn't matter whether people voted for me or against me. If I would represent
Got it.
everybody in West Virginia. So, does that respond to
Got
your
it.
question?
Yes, of
Oh,
course.
thank you.
So
That very much
that's
so.
yeah.
Yeah, and I want to let you know one of the discussions that Will and I had, and we consulted specifically about this. We all know the R&D in West Virginia. A lot of people they see the R, they do the D, they ignore it if it's the wrong letter, and that's in both parties. I get that. So part of what we did decide is to simply remove that from the page. So if you look at our website, you'll see it has your name, but we don't lead with that because we honestly hope that people will click a name, get to know the person, and then they like, dislike, etc., and then they just go in a little bit deeper. So hopefully people will get over that little hump and get to listen to somebody. It's, oh wow, I never heard that. Sounds great. It's like, oh my God, that guy's a Republican or he's a Democrat. It's like, wow, I never would have thought.
Well,
So thank you
I'm
for
not
opening it up.
complaining. I'm not complaining about the situation that we only had 30%. I
Yeah.
mean,
Right,
this was the reverse of when I was growing up.
right,
Right now we got 91 Republicans and 9 Democrats in the House of Delegates. With the LBJ's landslide in 1964, there were 91 people caucus of the Democrats. One was actually a Republican that the Democrats had actually
right,
run on the Democratic ticket. But it was a 91 to 9 split then. And for any Republican that tried to run statewide, it was a similar hurdle. But
right.
you can't, you're supposed to set a good example for the people who are younger than you are, even though, none of us, running for statewide office or Democrats may be elected in this election. I mean, I'm ready to serve. Don't get me wrong.
Right,
But if
right,
I'm not, the point is we need to fill out the ballot and give people a reason to go to the polls. So even if
got it.
I don't get elected, if I don't turn people off enough that they don't even go and vote, there's some good people down ticket,
Right,
Democrats down ticket who may get elected because they at least came out to vote. So
right.
here's some
Uh,
other things you don't know about me.
mhm.
I guess you've been following this a bit about independents voting in the primaries, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not allowed anymore. They're closing the primaries.
Only the Republicans. So let me give you the
Only,
history of that, okay?
wow.
So I have one of my closest friends is a like pro-Trump actually he's an independent right now, but his name's David, and
May I interject for a moment? Because
yeah,
because it occurred to me in a quick thought. Um, the actual numbers like
I can't
30%
hear you.
Republican,
You're
30%
breaking up.
Republican, 30. Oh, sorry.
You
It's
broke
like
up.
40, 30, 30. I mean, 30% independent,
Right.
30. So it's actually the Republicans are actually a minority in the state. The
Sure.
larger chunk is becoming the independents,
But I'm
unaffiliated.
trying to give you the history about
Yep.
Okay, so let's turn the clock back to the 1980s. Okay, I have a friend named Dave Bailey. who at the age of 28 was the Republican nominee for state treasurer. And interestingly, the guy he ran against was Larry Bailey. So he had Bailey versus Bailey in the 1980 election. Anyway, Dave was treasurer of the state party. And one of the things that was coming, because there are very few people who were independents back when I was a kid or when he was a kid. And so then a lot of people started saying, well, we want to be independent. I don't know. You obviously you can vote for whom you want in the general anyway, but they did not want to be identified as a Democrat or Republican. So you had these independents. So Dave said, well, I think it's a smart idea. We let them vote in the Republican primaries. So David got the Republican Executive Committee to let independents vote in the Republican primaries. You still got to request a ballot. So that went on for years. All right. Fast forward to 2007. All right. A friend of mine, Richie Robb, had been mayor of South Charleston for 32 years. It was on the West Virginia State Democratic Executive Committee. He had a scheduling conflict, and he asked me to be his proxy. So the issue came up. This is when Joe Manchin was governor, about whether the State Democratic Executive Committee should change its bylaws to allow independents to vote. And I looked at the proposal. I said, this is ambiguous. Does it, we want to let independents vote in our primaries, but what's the effective date? Does it apply to federal elections? Does it apply to municipal elections? And I was running for mayor in a five-way. There were five Democrats in the Democratic primary in South Charleston. So I asked I crafted the language, which was adopted by the Democratic Party back then, to say effective April 1st, 2007, that independents would be allowed to vote in Democratic primaries, whether it's a federal, county, state, or municipal elections. So I'm the guy that crafted the language. And so now, fast forward, it's 19 years later, and the Republican Party has slammed the door. And my friend David, who's now an independent, is really ticked off about it because he'll either have to vote a completely nonpartisan ballot or vote for the Democratic ballot in the primary. But it's his party is they're doing the opposite of what they should be doing. I'm for making things easy. I never understood why people want to close the primaries anyway, because there's no litmus test. You don't have to uh, present some sort of credentials other than your uh, you know
Party.
birth certificate, whatever, to register in the first place. Doesn't matter what you are, but we have all these different policies. Well, we don't want these people taking over the party. Heck, I just want them to be involved. I mean, I want them to be involved. My ancestors fought in the American Revolution. I'm direct descendant of people fought in the American Revolution. I'm direct descendant of people fought in the War of 1812. I'm the direct descendant of people fought in the Civil War. This our republic is, it's a quarter thousand years old, and then my ancestors have been here since the 1600s, a lot of them. So what's important is we get people to vote. I mean, and learn what the issues are.
That's
I'm
right.
not trying to
I think
exclude things. I want to include people.
I think you'll appreciate
So that's my answer.
that is central to the goal of our site. So let's check the next question was, and I think you covered this, but you might want to go deeper on it as a policy or values issue, is what commitments are you willing to make regarding the sources of funding for your campaign? And you do want to make any comment about campaign funding in general?
Well, as I've already stated, I'm not doing fundraisers. If people want to donate to me, they can write a check to Cooper for Senate and mail it to the address on it's on the Secretary of State's website. I have a website up, or go to Act Blue. But I'm not. I don't think I have any problem with anybody on the far right or some corrupting influences. When I ran 2 years ago, most of my contributions were from me. Obviously, the great majority of the money come out of my pocket, and then some from my family and friends. And I got one. I got a contribution from Compact from UMW and some of the county Democratic associations. So it's just not going to. It's not going to happen. I would not accept money from a group that I disagreed with, or a donor that I disagreed with if I knew anything about him.
but as a that is a personal, and I invite you to go a little further. Do you see a problem in terms of policy with money in politics generally that you would want to do anything about policy wise?
In the first place, the First Amendment, I believe, the Bill of Rights was put in to protect the United States from tyranny. And so a lot of people say, well, money is free speech is money. And we have the 1976 U.S. Supreme Court Buckley versus Valeo. So anybody has a right to spend all of his or her assets in a political campaign, as long as you don't coordinate with there are limits. You can put limits on people's contributions, but you can't put limits on what people do as an independent expenditure if it's not coordinated. And I think you said, well, that's not fair. Why should the billionaires be able to do that? Well, it's not perfect. I can assure you, as a person that's usually been outspent, it isn't perfect. But I think the most important thing is you allow different views to get across. A lot of the people who are progressives are millionaires and billionaires. I think there are a lot more people who are millionaires and billionaires who are right wing. But I'm not. I think the most important thing is not that when there are contributions or there are independent expenditures, that you have to find who is the human being behind the corporation, who is the human being behind limited liability company. You see this name, Friends of blah blah blah. I want to know who the people are who are making the contribution. Now, that doesn't apply in ballot issues. We have federal case law in West Virginia, but when you're talking about candidates running for office, you know, I'm quite happy with keeping the contribution limits low, but they Republicans have raised them. I'm for full disclosure that I want to know all these groups. I don't care if they're left wing or right wing. I want to know, other than when people pay their union dues. I'm not talking about that. But when you're talking about somebody contributing 10,000 or more, to a campaign, I think that people ought to know who the people are that are donating to a particular candidate or against a particular candidate. And then the voter can say, well, is that person just altruistic, or does he or she have a vested interest in the outcome, not in terms of good government, but in terms of improving his or her amount of assets? Is that responsive?
Gotcha. No, that's very responsive, and I think you make the distinction of what is most people refer to as dark money. You don't know where it's coming
Yeah.
from, out of state, etc. So yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah.
Awesome.
Will?
I'll go ahead with the next one. This is about like the issues that in West Virginia. It's many West Virginians have faced issues like has have faced issues for decades, like addiction, high healthcare costs, and electricity costs, etc. What will you do differently to ensure your plans actually turn into results? And you can touch on more than just those issues if you have
Yeah.
anything in
Well,
mind.
remember, certainly have more experience than my other candidates put together on public utilities because I worked for the Public Service Commission for 25 years. And what the politicians don't tell you is there's case law, that is laws meaning court decisions, and one of them is called Permian basins, Permin basins, and
Yep.
that the Permian Basin cases by the U.S. Supreme Court. If you have a regulated and you have free market. One thing, you can have free market capitalism. That they go by one rule. But if you're going to regulate what capitalists can do and determine what their maximum and minimum rates uh, are for an enterprise, you've got to give them an opportunity to get a reasonable return on investment. Now, politicians don't know that. They don't have a clue. And so what they do say, "Oh, I'm against get electric rates going up. I'm against water rates going up. I'm against." Well, of course, we all don't want to pay higher rates, but I'm being intellectually honest. We're in a poor state. We are extended over 24,000 square miles. And it's more expensive to maintain can I take a break for a second?
Sure. Yeah.
So, so let's be intellectually honest about this. Politicians will go up there and get a whole bunch of people and say, I want, I oppose this rate. And I've signed petitions. There are comments you can give at the Public Service Commission. But what normally happens is that the utility asks for more than it's really legally entitled to under the internal case law of the Public Service Commission. People don't want to pay any higher rates. The commission staff will make recommendations. I made recommendations when I was a staff attorney at the Public Service Commission. There's also the Consumers Advocate, which is separate in a separate building, and that was specifically created by the legislature to come to protect the interest of consumers and like electric and other similar rate cases, although that you might say that's redundant. Anyway, it gives people some security. There's somebody there that's in case the people in charge of the commission were just trying to pick people who would always go the way of the utility. You have the Consumer Advocate Division. And what usually happens is you get a rate increase, but not as much as what the public utility asked for. But let's say if you don't do that, okay, if you don't do that, uh, first, if you don't do it, they can always go up to the federal courts and get the thing overturned if it's too drastic. But short of that, if you don't ever give any rate increases, what's going to happen is your infrastructure is going to fall apart because they'll find a way not to take care of it. So the Public Service Commission is supposed to monitor is the money, how's it being spent? And they do. The staff, when they decide whether to recommend that, there's a rate increase or not, they're going to see how the company actually is spending its money. They go through the books and records. And nobody, including me, likes to get a higher pay a higher rate. Although, since I have 24 solar panels on my house, I'm a net generator of electric power. Right now, under the net metering thing, I'm not paying paying the minimum bill, and also have plug-in hybrid. That's an aside, but people don't, politicians don't want to tell people the truth. Politicians want to tell people what the people want to hear. And we need more people in the state, but our legislature passes all these laws which make people less likely to live in the state. They pass laws against, depriving women of reproductive rights. They are passing legislation against diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm for reproductive rights. I'm for diversity, equity, and inclusion. They are trying to make it a felony to harbor somebody who was born out of the United States and is not, properly registered. Well, what I want to do is get these people legal. As long as they don't commit rape or murder, I want them to stay in the United States. It is true. We don't have room in the United States for all 8 billion people on planet Earth, but we certainly do have room for all the people who are currently here. And I consider immigrants to be an asset and not a liability, but not our West Virginia legislature. The West Virginia legislature has been moving West Virginia in the wrong direction ever since it took power 12 years ago, in my opinion. I don't claim to be, that's what I think. They got, they implemented right to work. All that does is lower the standard of living of the working class. Let me give you an example. I'm older than you two fellas. When I went to Yale, in the summers I came back to Yale, worked in an automotive parts warehouse. Federal minimum wage is $1.60. This was a non-union blue collar job. Do you know what what you'd have to be paid now? What you'd have to be paid now to have the same purchasing power as $1.60 an hour had in 1969. As
I
of
do not know.
January this year,
15.
$14.14.
Pretty good.
And so when I ran for Congress in 2008, I wanted to raise the minimum wage to $9.60, but now it's 18 years later. Now I want to raise it to $15 an hour. That's being conservative. I'm just trying to conserve the purchasing power. I go to these fast food places, and these kids are getting paid $8 or $9 an hour, and so no wonder they can't accumulate wealth. This whole thing's been going on during my lifetime. We should have much higher taxes on the wealthy. We should raise the minimum wage, in my opinion, and we should do things to encourage people to use solar and wind and other renewable things. And the fossil fuels will still be there, but they'll be there as backups. Well, of course, West Virginia is going exactly the opposite direction. And so, it plays very well in West Virginia with the coal association. I don't hate coal. My paternal grandfather owned a coal mine. My dad worked, and his brothers worked in a coal mine. But facts are facts. I believe in science, and I believe in climate change. And the CO2 and the CH4, which is methane, they're going up there, are have a greenhouse effect. And we have to
Right.
be responsible to the people, the 8 billion plus people on the planet. We're destroying all these species because of the changes in the planet. And so, for those people who are calling themselves Christian nationalists, I believe that your people are supposed to be the stewards of the earth, right? And so, I don't think they're doing a very good job by putting all this CO2 and methane into the air. All right. Does that answer your
Got
question?
it. Yeah, yeah,
Yes, it
absolutely. I
is.
think I'll take the next, and I think you've touched on it, but it's a chance to go a little deeper. When
Sure.
experts present different recommendations, what process do you use to reach a well-reasoned conclusion?
Well, I know one of my opponents, you're talking about, you need to be a skeptic. Don't a skeptic. Just like with all these wars we've gotten into, most of the wars we have gotten into in the United States, we didn't need to fight. Yeah, we need to fight the Civil War if you want to keep the country together. We needed to fight World War II. But all the other wars since the American Revolution, in which my ancestors fought, these have been wars of choice. We didn't have to enter the War of 1812. We didn't have to enter the Mexican War. We didn't have to enter World War One. These were wars of choice. And now we've started another war, and you haven't gone through the U.S. Senate, and so I think that Trump should be impeached for that right there. But getting back to your question, uh, I worked at the Public Service Commission. We always had skepticism. Whenever we got the utilities came in and tried to get ask for a rate increase, they always padded the things. They always would try to say these are things that mean that you need to raise our rates. We have these expenditures, like we in our staff would say, wait a minute, no, those aren't rate making expenditures, and they would disallow it and wouldn't give the utility as much as it wanted. So that's the methodology. And understand, as I have at the age of 76, the wars we've gotten into in my lifetime, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution under LBJ, and but I turned against the war in 1966.
Six.
Every all these people, they have a vested interest in trying to get you to engage in certain behavior. And so it is your job, all of our jobs, not just people in the legislature, is to be skeptical. Don't believe something just because somebody says it. But don't base it on conjecture. Go into science. Go into the empirical method where there's scientific studies have been. We know vaccines work. Thank goodness we have vaccines. I'm old enough. I have a little scar from when I had my smallpox vaccination. I took sugar cubes and shots for my polio shots. And just go back if you want to know a world without vaccines. Go back 100 years or 110 years. Go to your county courthouse and look on the death register and
Death
see
records. Yep,
the ages of a lot of these people died. Kids in grade school, whole families would die at the same time.
yep. Yeah, I'm aware of those. Thank you.
Yeah,
So Will?
I as a as a younger guy, it's really inspiring the knowledge and wisdom that you're providing, honestly. Like I'm 23 and this stuff means a lot. Like so thank you again for everything. So our
Next one's yours.
our next question is what is one necessary policy to address West Virginia's longstanding issues that might be unpopular but you believe is essential?
First, let me say one of the things I do want is that if it's unpopular with business, is
Yeah.
raising the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour.
Yeah.
Right now, it's a little bit over $7 an hour at the federal level, a little bit over eight, in West Virginia. So that would be
Right.
unpopular with the business people. But uh, could you be a little bit more specific in what you're trying
Um,
to do?
it's something you think that you would bring as a policy issue is even though, like you said, with raising the minimum wage, you may get pushback. It may be used against you. It may be unpopular in quotes, but you believe it's essential. Like you said, taxing people who are very wealthy. It
Yeah.
may be perceived as unpopular by some, but you would still push forward. It was where would you be controversial would be a simple way to put it. I think you said reproductive rights also.
Yeah. Oh, in West
Yeah.
Virginia, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I was pro-choice before Roe v. Wade. I was pro-choice between Roe v. Wade and the Dobbs decision. I'm still pro-choice. Let me give you a little lesson that you may not know this again, and I hope I'm not telling you stuff you already know. But here's when I became pro-choice in 1962 when I was 12 years old. And why that happened? Well, my mother, who was the head of our household, subscribed to a magazine called Life magazine. I don't know if you've ever heard of Life, but it used to be a much bigger magazine.
Yeah.
But in 1962, there was a lady that they called Sherry Finkbein. All right, she had taken this drug which had been used a lot in Europe, and I think she probably took it in Europe called thalidomide. All right,
Oh yeah. Right.
and but luckily the FDA had not approved it here, but I think she'd taken it out of the country. And so it turned out that she was about to, she wanted to terminate a pregnancy. And it was likely that if she gave birth, that the fetus would become a baby without an arm or a leg or something like that, or not even live. And so what they had court cases, they would not let her have an abortion, even under those situations. She had to take a flight to Sweden to get an abortion. That was 1962. And when they did do the abortion there, found out that I think the fetus was already missing at least one leg, maybe more. And if it had been given birth to, held to the full term, would have not been viable, would have died anyway. And that's when I became pro-choice, 1962. That was 11 years before Roe v. Wade. And I don't think, as the expression goes, not the church, not the state, women must decide their fate. Remember, if you're a man and you're opposed to abortion, don't have one, okay? And I watched my now ex-wife give birth to both of my two sons, and women go through an awful lot of pain. My great grandfather, who was a prohibitionist minister, his second wife, wanted very much to have the kid she gave birth to, but died as a result of the childbirth. It's not for me to decide. I'm a Democrat with a capital D and a libertarian with a small L. I believe that these are freedoms that people have, and you may not agree. Just as if somebody breaks into your house and you decide whether to shoot the person or not. You may be a pacifist and say that's terrible, or you may own a gun and shoot the person, and maybe the person was only going to steal something. I don't care. I would not prosecute that person because I believe in individual freedom. And so, I mean, I'm off a little bit on a tangent. I'm just telling you my thought process. Is that helpful?
Yes, we that's what we want you to do to explain your thoughts. That's exactly what
Thank
we
you. That's where
so
that's why we're having yep.
Yeah.
so
So let me see. What experience, and I think you've covered this, but you tell me if you feel you want to go further into it, and then we go, if not, we'll go to the next one. Is what experience or expertise best prepares you for this role, and where do you expect to rely on advisors?
Well, first, I've been studying government since I was in grade school. I was, I mean, I think I knew more about how government worked than Donald Trump did when he was, at his first inauguration, which is a very low bar. But I mean, I've been interested in politics since I was 10 years old. When John F. Kennedy ran for president in 1960, my family were Kennedy supporters and actually drew a poster on election night, November 8th, 1960, with a donkey, JFK, this was colored pencils, and Uncle Sam said, "Let Democrats do it for you." So I have been interested in politics philosophically I've been a Democrat now for 66 years of my 76 years, and I've studied government. I've worked in numerous campaigns for other candidates. I've run a few times myself. I'm the acting chairman of the South Charleston Democratic Executive Committee. I served from, see, 2006 to 2015 as a member of the Kanawha County Democratic Executive Committee. I'm also a ward committee man for the city executive committee. I mean, almost all the races for office I've worked, all the Democratic campaigns for president I've been involved in. I've studied government, my whole life, and how it all works, and so I'm certainly prepared for that. And I used to watch the bills before the legislature. I would get the back then. Of course, this is before the internet. There would be a blue booklet for the House of Delegates and a white booklet for the Senate. They may still do that, but they didn't have the internet. They didn't have personal computers, and I would read through that, and I've worked on legislation that's been adopted by the West Virginia legislature, and I have argued in federal court about uh, West Virginia laws that were being challenged under the Commerce Clause of the not United States Constitution. And I've argued cases before the state Supreme Court involving the powers of the State Board of Education. So I know an awful lot about government and about law, math, government, and law. Those are things I'm really good at. Recognizing
Wonderful.
people's faces, not so much. Not so much into sports, but I definitely have always been focused on government and law. I watched back in the '60s the civil rights people getting their heads bashed in at the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and I just was affected by it. And I had ancestors who were slaveholders. I mean, my on all four of my grandparents had ancestors, at least one ancestor who was a slaveholder. And I've always been aware of that since I was a kid. So one of the things I always thought, I don't have any legal duty to do anything about the discrimination, but I think I made my own internal goal to try to remediate a lot of what had happened. I took African American history at Yale. I took African history at Southern Connecticut State College. I took a lot. I know a lot. I think one of you said you're Buddhist. My roommate, 2 years at Yale, was from Seneca Dinwiddie, Seneca, and he was a world famous painter before he went to Yale. But when he was a teenager, he was a Buddhist. And the Muslims are across the street from my backyard. So I believe in a very open society with people of all religious beliefs, etc. Now I've gotten off a little bit from the question, so you want to rephrase it if I've been off on a tangent. I apologize.
It was about
No, I think
your
no, I think we went into a different area. Yes.
Hmm? What did I
Paul, can you
Thank you.
repeat
My
that again?
connection.
did you want to ask me again, or did I answer it?
My connection was obviously lost for a second. No, I think you're caught up. I think you did, and like you said, because you're riffing on it, you can go in different directions. You can add other material. I'd say that go ahead and ask the. I'll ask this question, then you ask the next one, and I'll do the closer.
Thank you.
So, how will you engage with constituents who did not vote? Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Is it maybe my
Yeah,
connection is
we
weak?
hear you.
Yeah, right.
We
No,
heard that perfect.
Okay, got it.
same way
How will you
Shelley Moore
engage?
Capito does.
Okay,
I mean, she has a paid staff, and some of
all
those,
right. How will you?
yeah, go
Oop,
ahead. Now say it.
oops, sorry. Okay, go ahead, Paul.
No, the question is, how will you engage? Oh, wow. How will you engage with constituents who did not vote for you or strongly disagree with your positions?
Okay, now.
All right. So I don't know how people whether they voted for me or against me because we have a secret ballot. But if they want to have input, every member of the Senate has a paid staff, And then certainly we need to have town halls and let people, you know, make their comments. And of course, they're all in social media and all these things you younger folks are good at. But the point is, I would employ people who were really tech savvy on that and listen to what people have to say. I used to answer questions. This is what's funny. People write letters to their congressman or their senator complaining about something that goes on in the state. Well, then that letter is sent down, and I used to write answers for U.S. senators and congressmen because the people wrote, it was something that wasn't in the federal jurisdiction, but you write the letter to to your congressman or U.S. senator, it gets sent down. So I've already done that. I've already been responsive to inquiries when people had a particular problem. And most people don't know where to complain to. They don't know, what branch of government does what. They don't understand that. They just know they have a need. They know that they have brown water coming out of their water pipes. They know that they can't afford their payments. Let me tell you something.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I am I have prostate cancer, okay, and I'm taking a drug. I'm undetectable on my PSA. You want to know what it costs me per month? $14,000 a month for Xtandi. That's 30. That's 60 tablets you take
Yeah.
2 a day. Now I'm not. My copay has been very small. So when I was 15, we passed Medicare, and the Republicans called that socialized medicine. The
Mm-hmm.
people in this state don't have the wherewithal to. They're just getting hit right and left. Their real income is dropping. Often they don't have clean water or their wastewater isn't properly treated. They can't afford to, buy things at the grocery store, and it's going to be worse because one, Trump's tariffs, which thank goodness the U.S. Supreme Court's declared unconstitutional, but he's trying to come up with another, and the war in Iran, totally unnecessary, totally unnecessary. That was a war of choice that we've been into for over 2 weeks. All these things are making life more difficult for the people of West Virginia. So I certainly am aware of it. I certainly understand they don't know, the average citizen doesn't know what to do about it. But at least I think I'm in my discussion with you, I think you understand that I have a grasp of what really is the cause. And I'm not going to lie to people and tell them they know, as a lot of populists do, say, well, all we got to do is this. I'm a progressive Democrat and I'm a fiscal conservative. We need to start paying for things. As I told you, when I worked in 1969, $1.60 an hour, and now you'd have to get paid 14 an hour to have the same purchasing power. And one of the reasons is the inflation is because we keep, you know, our going borrowing more and more and more money and putting our children and grandchildren in debt. And I have 2 children, I have 4 grandchildren. So I'm not just going to say I'm for something because that Bernie Sanders is for it or anything else. If you're going to have some type of service, you're going to have some sort of revenue to pay for it. And I'm certainly willing to raise taxes on the wealthy to help pay for it. I know it wasn't exactly. I know I'm going on another tangent, but trying to answer your question.
Oh, that you've been answering the questions pretty well, so
No,
you gotta have
covered.
more confidence with it. No, I'm just
Yeah,
kidding.
yeah.
So the
All right.
next is what is your plans for
You got the
transparent?
second last. I'll take the last.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is your plans for transparency and accountability while in office?
Well, transparency. Are you trying to want people to know if I meet with somebody who's a lobbyist? Is that what you mean? I don't know.
Well, I mean, it depends. Most of the candidates have saying they're willing to commit to town halls, and some of them will say,
Yeah.
they'll put their phone number out there. Just things like that. Any personal plans you may have
Well,
that.
but I mean, yeah, certainly will
Right.
make
We've
myself
had all
accessible.
across just to yeah. Go ahead.
I'll make myself accessible just as anybody else would. But not like the Republican members of Congress who don't go to town halls because they don't like the flack they're getting. We've the Democratic Party in Kanawha County had a town hall a few months ago, and the Republican incomes didn't come. They didn't come. They didn't want they didn't want to have people come and ask them tough questions. So if you're not willing to take if you as Harry Truman said, if you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. So
Yep.
I understand. I'll be getting it if the Democratic Party and independents were to honor me by making me their nominee, and then the people of West Virginia were to honor me by making me a U.S. senator. I'm not going to dodge issues. I have a very strong set of values on things. Also, I believe that compromise isn't a dirty word. You got to be able to work across the divide. I've got in my extended family, I got Republicans and Trump supporters and everything. We just that certain areas you just don't talk about because it's neither side is going to change. On a lot of issues, you're not going to change the other person's position. But a compromise is not a dirty word. If you may have to compromise on an issue, doesn't mean you give up your position. Remember, word government, Government. First six letters are government. What we now have is stalemate. And if you're not willing to cross lines for the betterment of your constituents, you're not doing your job in in Congress, in my opinion.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So
Thank you.
Paul, go ahead
All
with
right.
the last one.
Yeah. Last question is, do you have a position on ranked choice voting, and would you support it?
Yes, yes. Yeah, ranked choice voting, that's something Joe Manchin and my friend Joe Manchin, I know this will lose me votes because from on the left, yeah, Joe and I know he's for it, I'm for it. But the Secretary of State the guy who beat me for Secretary of State, uh, got the legislature to, make it illegal in West Virginia. So let me explain to people what ranked choice voting is. In some states, we have runoff elections. So if nobody gets at least 50%, of the vote, plus one as the expression goes, then you have a second election, which is the runoff. What ranked choice voting does is to eliminate that by basically allowing the voter, not mandating the voter to do it, but putting, okay, my first choice is this, and then my second and my third. In that case, if no one gets in a particular race, such as my race, there are five people running. So if we had ranked choice voting, the way it would work is, okay, you got Thornton Cooper and four other people. Let's say I come in second and you got four other people. Well, first thing is you would look at the votes and say, well, the person who's like, this is an example, the person who's in fifth place, we're going to drop that person from the chance to be in because he or she came in fifth place, but we're going to let the people who voted for that person, whoever their second choice was, we're going to add votes to that person, and so on until you get to a point where someone has over 50%. It's complicated. Okay, it's complicated. And some ways of doing it I don't agree with because if it's as long as it's discretionary. In other words, you shouldn't refuse to process somebody's ballot. You have ranked choice voting. The person only put down the person's first choice. You shouldn't throw out the ballot if that person didn't put a second or third or fourth choice. But ranked choice voting is good because it lets the will of the people be uh, followed. And secondly, it tends to reward people in the middle of the road, except as opposed to the extremist. And
Right.
we have way too much polarization in this country. When I was a kid, you had a lot of liberals in the Republican Party, you had a lot of conservatives in the Democratic Party. It was easy to compromise and get things done. Now, because of polarization, almost everybody on the left who's in a party is, on the Democratic Party, and almost everyone on the right who's in a party is a Republican. And that's why you can't get things done. So ranked choice voting is just one mechanism to allow the will of the people to be, effectuated by finding someone who is not the one who's most polarizing, but the one who probably is the least polarizing. So I think it's a good idea because, as I said, the first six words, the first six letters of government are govern. And I'm tired of the uh, stalemate we have in Congress. When you have stalemate, you let autocrats like Donald Trump have more power. The United States Congress needs to try to, compromise and get things done because when it doesn't, it gives authoritarians and would-be monarchs more power because of the power vacuum. So yes, I am for ranked choice voting, even though the legislature has voted to prohibit here in West Virginia. Another example of the bad laws that have been passed since the Republicans took control of the legislature, in my opinion.
Thank you. All right.
Wonderful. So that
Will,
was all of our questions. So again, Thornton, we
Okay.
appreciate your time.
Thank
And
you. Thank you so much. I hope I candidly answered your questions
of
and did
course,
not dodge anything.
you did not.
no, you
So
you
thank
you
you.
do not have a care. You don't have a tendency to dodge.
Yeah.
All
The way
right.
I am in private is the way I am in public. That's what you
Awesome.
see is what you get. So, but I will say this, no matter who wins the Democratic primary, I will support the Democratic nominee. Thank you
Awesome.
very
Thank
much.
you.